Halloween uh, really got its beginning as an ancient Celtic festival called Samhain. And this was when the people would light bonfires and wear costumes to ward off ghosts. And then in the 8th century, Pope Gregory III designated November 1st as a time to honor the saints of the church. And of course, this became known as All Saints' Day. And over time, the folks incorporated some of the tradition of the Celtic festival of Samhain. And so the evening before became known as All Hallows' Eve, which later became Halloween. And of course, over time, we know what this evolved into, the activities, trick-or-treating, carving jack-o'-lanterns, and donning costumes, and of course, eating candy. And before I get into the regular message, I just wanted to share a couple of interesting facts I found on this site. And this one was surprising to me. And this is that Americans spend an average of $6 billion annually on Halloween. And that makes it the country's second largest commercial holiday after Christmas. Who knew? The other one I found interesting is 1/4 of all the candy sold in the United States is purchased for Halloween. And then this was the one that made me sit up and take notice. In 2019, Americans spent $490 million, wait for it, on costumes for their pets. I know we love our four-footed friends, but wow, that really startled me. But I guess in some ways it shouldn't, because in our neighborhood, there are a number of homes that are just fully decked out with Halloween decorations. And then in yesterday's New York Times, there was an interesting article that puts a little chink in this year's celebration of Halloween. And the title of that article was How the Supply Chain Stole Halloween. And if they were saying, good luck trying to find any meme-inspired costumes or any costumes at all, of course, due to all the ships that are lined up trying to get into the harbors all around the world, literally. All right, so much for all the silliness. We'll set that aside, and I'll put my real glasses on so that I can actually see what's going on in the world. All right. So we're in the month of October, and our monthly theme this month is Going Further Together. And this comes under our annual theme for this year called Timeless Wisdom and Evolutionary Vision. And this week, our title is I'll Meet You There. And as I prepared for this talk this week, I deviated a little bit from the script that they send out. And of course, they send out just as ideas. And so I'm going to move away from that just a little bit, but I want to continue to focus on this idea of meeting us there. And some of the ideas that I want to cover today relate to this idea of meeting, and of course to our going further together as a way of being in community. And one of the things that occurred to me is that when we meet with one another, we first have to agree on where we're going to meet. So agreement becomes the key to meeting, whether one-on-one with another person or as a group or in community. There needs to be agreement in order for us to meet. The other area I want to talk about a little bit is our cultural upbringing and how that affects our meeting with one another. And lastly, how we see ourselves today and the effect that that has on our lives and, of course, our meeting together and individually. And so as I was considering this, one of the ideas that came to me was the biblical idea of being of one accord, being in agreement with one another. And in meeting someone, like I said, there has to be an agreement at the very least on where you're going to meet physically and hopefully spiritually also. And it reminded me of this idea of meeting one-on-one with a quote from the master teacher Jesus in the New Testament, where he said, "Whenever two or more of you are gathered in my name, there shall I be in your midst." Now, in our more science of mind metaphysical interpretation, we might look at that from the perspective of the Sanskrit word namaste, which means when we meet, the divine in me recognizes and acknowledges the divine in you. So our October theme of going further together encourages us to be in community with one another, which of course implies being there in one accord. And so I want to share a slide here that is one of a biblical example, and then one that is of Ernest Holmes. All right, so first from the New Testament, and I believe this is the writings of Paul in his letter to the Philippians. He says, "Fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, being of one mind." All right, and then if we move to what Ernest Holmes talked about, he said, "Our treasure is already in heaven, and our thought can take us to this treasure only when it is in accord with divine harmony and perfect love." So I like this part, what Ernest talks about, because he's saying that it is our thought that takes us there. It is our thought and being in accord with the divine that takes us to that place. And in this case, of course, he was talking about our treasure, which is already in heaven. And we know that as good science of mind students, that heaven is in our consciousness. It is where we are, that is the heaven that we acknowledge. And so as I was thinking about today being Halloween, I also found myself considering how the influence of our Judeo-Christian traditions has impacted our Western culture. And it really impacted my coming into accord and into community with science of mind. And sometimes, for as varied as the English language is, there are times when it lacks good updated words. And what I'm about to talk about is an idea from Ernest Holmes. And we have to remember that Ernest was writing in the 1920s and the 1930s. And so I wish there was another word for this, because the thought and the idea that Holmes came up with that I think applies to these traditions impacting us is the idea of race thought. Now, of course, Ernest was not talking about anything racial. He was talking about the human race, the entire human race. And by that, he was talking about this idea that this is a subconscious continuation of all these different things that influence us from our time of growing up all the way through there, but they're shared. These are things that we all kind of take for granted because they're just part of the culture that we were raised in. And whether or not your particular upbringing was in a religious family, or whether it was Christian, Jewish, Islamic, Buddhist, Hindu, or even agnostic or atheist, we would have had to live under a rock in order not to have been influenced by the pervasive presence of the Judeo-Christian imagery and stories. And we have to look no further than at our major holidays. I mean, the biggest one of the year, of course, in our Western culture is Christmas. And we look at Easter. And in the Jewish community, where they celebrate Passover. And then I was thinking about the observance of Mardi Gras in New Orleans, especially, which has its ties to a religious thing, because that is the big celebration before the season of Lent, when people typically give up things and have a supplication in their mind to God. And certainly there is Halloween. So these stories and these images reside deep in our subconscious, and they subtly influence various aspects of our life experience. And so what I'd like to do is have a little bit of fun with this, but also a little bit of seriousness at the same time, because I'd like to share with you several images from my ongoing collection, excuse me, of witty cartoons and drawings that I hope will highlight some of these concepts. And for those of you who can't see a computer screen, I will describe the images as well. But each of these has a essence of this Judeo-Christian tradition that I think are just automatic for us. And so most of those references are never mentioned in the cartoon itself. It's just assumed that we will know what these are. So let's have a look here and I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, so the first one is a New Yorker cover that was published shortly after the passing of Steve Jobs, who of course was the genius president of Apple Computer. And in this, notice that we see the pearly gates, we see St. Paul, and those two images, virtually no one needs to explain that to us. We just intuitively know that. That's part of this subconscious ideas that we all share. But I think the genius of this article is that we see Steve Jobs in his classic black turtleneck waiting while St. Peter looks up his name on an iPad. And I thought, what a wonderful tribute to Steve Jobs. But in it, there are those images of St. Peter, the pearly gates, the gate to heaven. Now, the next one, a little more humorous, but we notice here that, let me see if I can lower that just a bit. There we are. So we see Moses holding the tablets of the Ten Commandments. We see Mount Sinai in the background. And those images, again, are ones that I think almost no one would have to be told what those mean. Those live within us. And the clever little quote says, so technically, Moses is the first man to download files from the cloud using a tablet. All right, so the next one of my all-time favorites, is one, again, has another Judeo-Christian image in the form of Noah's Ark. And we see Noah's Ark receding into the distance, leaving behind two young dinosaurs sitting on a rock at an outcropping from the water. And the one little dinosaur is saying, oh, crap, was that today? And of course, in this, I think the genius is that, yes, we see the Noah's Ark, but the cartoonist also captures a present day idea that we are so busy. And how many of us have run into this? Oh my goodness, I forgot about that, just as the dinosaur did. All right, the next one comes from the far side. And if you followed any of Gary Larson's cartoons over the years, he has this preoccupation with hell. And in this particular image, we're in a cave. We see fire burning in the background, and the two devils are standing up, looking over the people who are all getting, apparently, their morning coffee. They all have coffee cups. And the one is saying to the other one, oh man, the coffee's cold. They thought of everything. And so once again, humor, and yet at the same time, more of these Judeo-Christian images. And the last one is, again, let me frame that a bit better. This one apparently is Adam and Eve outside of the garden, because we see the garden kind of behind them. And the title of it is The First Lawyer. And Adam is apparently arguing with God. And to me, I think this is kind of after they've been put out of the garden. And he says, but without actually having eaten the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we could not have known it was wrong to disobey you. All right, so a bit of humor, and apologies to anyone who happens to be in the legal profession. But once again, humor attached to these images that everyone would recognize as Adam and Eve. And so we see that these images, along with many others like that, form an indelible part of our cultural awareness. Now, I don't know about you, but when I discovered science of mind and decided to study it, undoing some of the fundamental concepts of the Judeo-Christian influence took some real work. I, like many of you, I'm sure, had this image of God as the old white man with the gray beard sitting on the cloud up in the sky, and supposedly God knows everything about me, whether I'd been good or bad. And of course, that sort of reminds me of that Christmas song, that Santa supposedly knows those same things. He knows me when I'm good. He knows me when I'm bad. He knows me if I've been bad or good. So be good for goodness sake. The other one that was always a struggle was this idea of needing to constantly ask God for forgiveness. And that was largely because of Adam and Eve's original sin of eating an apple from a particular tree. And then, of course, there's the concept that we saw in the Far Side cartoon, that of heaven and hell. And that idea of being judged and having to be in perfect alignment with God before we have acceptance into heaven. There's just something about that just always gave me a little trouble. And then I had this personal struggle with this idea that I sort of related to as jumping through these certain hoops, metaphorically speaking, in order to avoid being banished for all eternity. Something about that just, it didn't work for me. And then there were the contradictions between the images that we would see of God in the Old Testament, who it said God's pleasure is to give us, his children, the keys to the kingdom. And yet you contrast that with the God who killed and punished those who displeased him. And so those left me just not feeling well. And it was a long while before I was able to reconcile all of that into the current teachings. So whatever tradition is in your past, you found science of mind. And I would venture to guess that your path has been in some ways at least similar to mine. We likely have this religious baggage from the past in common. And we have come to understand, though, that science of mind has something to offer us in fulfilling our lives in ways that the old baggage could not. And so I came to understand that studying science of mind was a process of letting go and letting in. And in effect, it required of me to change parts of my worldview, how I saw myself in relation to the world, and in a larger sense, the universe around me. And one of the key parts of that, this is my process here, so I'm not suggesting that this should be everyone's, but for me, I related this to the psychology branch known as self-image psychology. And self-image is how we see ourselves, who we believe ourselves to be or not to be. Thank you, Shakespeare. Because our self-image defines every aspect of how and what we experience in our day-to-day lives. And I look at this, for me, the way I tried to make sense of this is this idea of a mental tapestry inside all of our thoughts, beliefs, feelings, emotions, experiences, and opinions all make up this mental tapestry, each thread of which is one of those thoughts, experiences. And the picture on there is my self-image. It's who I see myself to be. And it's a composite of all of those, again, thoughts, beliefs, feelings, emotions, experiences. And what I came to understand for me was that this tapestry forms a filter through which all of my life experience flows into me. Those things that I agree with, the tapestry just lets through because there's agreement. There's all sorts of things I can agree with. And those things that I don't agree with, they never make it through the tapestry because I just reject them out of hand. And so what happens for me is that I began to realize too that science of mind offered me tools to make significant changes to my self-image, one thought or one belief at a time. It's like taking one strand out of that tapestry and being able to change that via what we know of as our spiritual practices, through meditation, through affirmation, through treatments. And by that, I'm speaking about spiritual mind treatments. And so what I've found was that our beliefs are powerful and they can be difficult to change. But one of the teachings that helped me along in some of my early days of Science of Mind, and I still go back and refer to them from time to time, are what's known as the teachings of Abraham. And this is that collective consciousness that speaks through Esther Hicks. And Abraham has some really good things to say about what we do in Science of Mind, not directly, of course, but through their own interpretation. And one of those is what Abraham talks about in terms of our beliefs. And Abraham says, and there we go. So Abraham says, a belief is just a thought that you think over and over again. A belief is just a thought that you think over and over again. And I was amazed. I went too far here. Come on, give it back. There we go. That, we think of our beliefs as being, these parts of our identity. This is who we are. And we hold on to those beliefs. We look at what beliefs do on the world stage. People fight wars over beliefs. And here's Abraham saying that a belief is just a thought that you think over and over again. Well, what that said to me is that those beliefs can be changed. I can go in and look at those beliefs using our Science of Mind knowledge, our treatments, our affirmations, and meditations, and use those to change those things that I want to change. And of course, that's right in line with, our cliche motto, if you will, of Science of Mind that says, change your thinking, change your life. And so it's by looking at those things and realizing I can really do that. I can really change those things in my life. That gives me the confidence and the freedom to move forward. And, since Science of Mind teaches us that we can change those things in our lives, then we have a way forward. We do not have to be stuck in those old beliefs. And, as I look at that of course says to me that we must think, that we must really think, and we must be involved in that process of thinking. And so I will share with you one final picture from my crazy collection here, but I hope that it will give you at least a momentary chuckle and yet something to really ponder about. And that is this. In this particular picture, we see a horse looking like he's in his corral. And he said, you can lead a human to knowledge, but you can't make him think. And for me, that speaks volumes. That you can lead a human to knowledge, but you can't make him think. And of course, that's a parody of the, you can't lead a horse to water, but you can't make him, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And I look at those things and I really get a lot out of these little cartoons and things. And I have a whole collection of these ranging from political things to just outright humorous things. But for me, each of those contains a little kernel of wisdom. It's almost like when Ernest Holmes talks about all the different spiritual traditions and how each of those has a little kernel of wisdom for our Science of Mind, that, for me, each of those little cartoons has a little spiritual wisdom for me. And so that really is the message that I have this morning, is that we have the ability to change, and we have the ability to take those concepts from the past. We have time to look at each one of those in our lives. And I am just really, really excited about this teaching that we have. And I want to see, as DCSL moves into its next chapter, into this next time that we rebirth ourselves with a new building, with some new ministries, I want to see us be excited about this teaching. I really want to be in a place where we can light the fire of excitement with people, because I think we have something very powerful here. And yet oftentimes it's, I don't know, it's sort of, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the right word. It's kind of smoothed over in a way that makes it a little easier to digest. And yet for those of us who really walk this path, it takes some work. It really takes some work. And I want to see us be the powerful people that we're called to be by taking this teaching and really making it our own. So will you just join with me in a time of prayer? And right now, I am just filled with gratitude. I am just so thankful for this teaching, for this community, for the horizon that we have as Downey CSL. And I just give thanks for that, and for knowing that all of this was birthed through our founder, Ernest Holmes, as he was in perfect alignment with the divine, and how he allowed that voice of the divine to speak through him, and to look at all these world traditions, all these different concepts and ideas, and distill them down into a teaching that we can use and absorb in our life today. And so I just want to offer that thanks for all of that, and to just now release all of those words, all of those ideas into the creative law of the universe, knowing that it takes everything that I've spoken into it and brings it into manifestation. And the final thing is to say, and so it is, and now it is. Amen. And thank you for the time to be able to speak with you today.